Hey, good morning, you all. Jason Meeks here. Uh, Last Thursday, September the 14th, I was watching a particular news broadcast about Hurricane Lee. Okay, and while watching this particular news broadcast about the Hurricane Lee and the potential um, devastation it may have on certain area of America, stuff like that. The Holy Spirit gave me a word of wisdom concerning Hurricane Lee. Okay, and for those who don't quite understand, a word of wisdom is different from a word of knowledge. Word of knowledge is um, basically it's a supernatural revelation of facts, whereas a word of wisdom is a supernatural understanding of situation or a matter. Okay, and while watching this particular broadcast, the Holy Spirit gave me a word of wisdom concerning Hurricane Lee, and this word of wisdom um, was a name in which why Hurricane Lee, prophetically why Hurricane Lee was named Hurricane Lee. And the Holy Spirit gave me the name Robert E. Lee. And it just came random. And that's how a lot of times we can know when it's the Holy Spirit giving us understanding or revelation, when it's something completely random, something we're not thinking about, a particular person we're not thinking about. And that name dropped into my understanding, Robert E. Lee. So I'm like, okay, well, of course, the name Lee and Hurricane, the last name Lee and Hurricane Lee, that makes sense. Um, and I was familiar with the name Robert E. Lee, but I still had to Google it to make sure for clarity. And after Googling, I understood that it was the war general who led the Confederate States during the time of the Civil War. Okay, so since this time, I've been following Hurricane Lee. I've been trying to find the association with Robert E. Lee and how does this all make sense. And like a light switch that went off in the morning, this morning, the Holy Spirit gave me a clear understanding of this prophetic association with General Robert E. Lee and Hurricane Lee. Okay, so let me attempt to break it down here on this video. Okay, so Hurricane Lee is part of is or was a storm that's associated with this perfect storm that's hitting the United States. Okay, Hurricane Lee, of course, was it's a storm, but it's part of this more prophetically perfect storm that's hitting the United States. And we know, and how does this relate to Robert E. Lee? Okay, well, Robert E. Lee was the general that led the Confederate States during the time of the Civil War. And during this time of Civil War, we know that several states, I believe it was 11 states, left the Union of the United States. They separated themselves, and that's why it was the Civil War. And this was led by General Robert E. Lee. And we know that the first Civil War was primarily about slavery. However, because of this perfect storm, which symbolized partly by Hurricane Lee, the Lord is showing that we're approaching another civil war here in the United States. And as the first Civil War had to do with slavery, this second Civil War is going to do with migration. The stuff we've been hearing about on the news about the border crisis and stuff like that. This is, I believe, because of this revelation that we're coming into a second civil war, and it's going to do with migration. This illegal immigration that's going on, the surplus of migrants in different cities in the United States, the border crisis that's been going on for quite some time now. This is going to be the reason for the next civil war here in the United States. Okay, and I believe that this also is going to be the reason why there's going to, just like it was a departure of states from the Union in the first Civil War, there's going to be a departure of states from the Union in this next Civil War. Okay, so this is all starting to make sense now by the name Robert E. Lee, and why he is that name and is prophetically associated with Hurricane Lee. Now, there's been prophetic voices that have shared about the coming of a split in the Union a lot prior to me sharing this video, but I was sharing this video in how the name Robert E. Lee was associated with Hurricane Lee. And this is why. It's because the Lord is showing a prophetic timeline now. As before, so again. During the time of Robert E. Lee, it was the Civil War, the split of Confederate states from the Union. And now we're in the time of Hurricane Lee. This marking the timeline, I believe, this showing this coming new Civil War that's going to be about migration, the migrants, the southern border issue, and it's going to cause states to depart from the Union again, just as it happened under Robert E. During the time of Robert E. Lee in the first Civil War. So I hope I was able to break this down to you, but these storm systems is part of a shaking of the United States. I believe this was the first time in 15 years that the northeastern states had this type of situation coming with the hurricane. And when we have situations like this, we have to understand that it's not just a coincidence that that something is more happening than meets the eye. And that's exactly what Hurricane Lee is. It's a time marker showing the relation between the time of General Robert E. Lee and today's time, Hurricane Lee. So basically, the time of Lee is happening again to the United States. Okay, so pray about it. I would love to hear and read you all's thoughts in the comments. And but I just thought that was just so amazing. First of all, how the Holy Spirit dropped that name Robert E. Lee to me last Thursday, and how it was prophetically associated. He allowed me to know that this Robert E. Lee was prophetically associated with Hurricane Lee, and that's why in the realm of the prophetic, Hurricane Lee got his name Hurricane Lee. Now we know man makes these names, but this name Hurricane Lee was inspired by the Spirit of God because of the association of the times of Robert E. Lee, General Robert E. Lee. Okay, so share your thoughts and comments. Be prayerful about this and other videos you may listen to, but I am convinced that we are in the timeline of this very next civil war. And this next civil war is going to be dealing with, it's going to be about migration this time around. Till next time, be blessed.